The palace doors opened slowly, revealing a hall lined with towering marble columns and walls trimmed in gold. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above, casting light across a long table where ministers, advisors, and royal guards stood in perfect silence. At the center of it all stood Muhammad Ali. He wasn't wearing a crown. He wasn't dressed in jewels. Just a tailored suit, calm posture, and the same quiet confidence that once shook stadiums around the world. Across from him sat one of the most powerful kings in the region, a ruler whose wealth could move markets, whose word could shape nations. The king leaned forward. "Champion," he began smoothly, "your name carries weight beyond boxing. You are admired here, loved here." Ali nodded politely. The king continued, "I want you to fight an exhibition match in my country. A grand event. Historic. The world will watch." Ali listened without interrupting. Then came the number, $200 million. The room seemed to inhale at once. Advisors exchanged quick glances. Some couldn't hide their shock. Even members of Ali's own team shifted in their seats. $200 million for one appearance, one event, no championship risk, no long-term contract, just show up. Fight. Shake hands. The king raised one finger. "There is only one small request." The hall fell silent. "You will publicly praise our leadership during the event." A short speech, written for you, nothing complicated. The air grew heavier. It sounded simple. Just a few sentences. Just a formality. Ali's eyes didn't move. His face didn't change. Outside the palace walls, citizens gathered, hoping to catch a glimpse of the legend. Inside, history waited for a response. $200 million. A single speech. A single moment. Ali slowly clasped his hands together, and just before he spoke, you could feel something shift in the room, because everyone there sensed it. This wasn't about money anymore. And whatever he was about to say was going to echo far beyond those golden walls. The offer hung in the air like a heavyweight punch that hadn't landed yet. $200 million. Even in a career filled with historic purses and global fame, the number sounded unreal. Advisors seated along the polished mahogany table subtly leaned toward one another, whispering calculations under their breath. Television rights, international sponsors, luxury endorsements. The event alone would break records before the first punch was thrown. Across the room, Muhammad Ali remained still. He had been in rooms like this before, rooms filled with power, influence, and expectation. Presidents had invited him. World leaders had praised him. Crowds of 100,000 had chanted his name under blazing stadium lights. But this felt different. The king signaled to an assistant, who stepped forward with a leather folder embossed in gold. Inside were contracts already prepared. The details were precise. A world-class arena built specifically for the event. Global broadcast coverage. Private jet transportation. A ceremonial banquet in Ali's honor. It will be the most celebrated sporting event in our nation's history. The king said smoothly. You will inspire millions. Ali nodded respectfully. Inspire them to what? The question lingered. The king smiled diplomatically. To greatness. To strength. To unity. Then he added, almost casually, and during the closing ceremony, you will deliver a prepared message expressing appreciation for our leadership and vision. One of Ali's team members shifted uncomfortably. It was framed as gratitude, as courtesy, but everyone in the room understood what it truly meant. Public endorsement, political symbolism, alignment. The king leaned back confident. You have always been a man of strong words, champion. We simply ask that your words honor our partnership. Ali's mind traveled back through his own history. He remembered being stripped of his heavyweight title for refusing induction into the Vietnam War. He remembered standing alone while critics called him unpatriotic. He remembered losing years of his prime because he would not bend his beliefs. He had paid for his principles before, and yet he had never wavered. A senior royal advisor spoke up gently. This is not about politics. It is about celebration. Your presence alone strengthens our image on the world stage. Strengthens our image. The phrase echoed. Ali understood image better than anyone. He had built one loud, poetic, fearless. But it was always rooted in authenticity. When he spoke, it was his voice. When he stood for something, it was his conviction. The king's tone softened. You deserve this reward. Few men change the world the way you have. Let us honor you properly. Outside the palace gates, cameras flashed as journalists waited for any update. Rumors were already spreading. A deal of this magnitude would dominate headlines for months. Inside, silence stretched. Ali looked down at the contract folder. $200 million. Generational wealth, security for his family. Charitable foundations funded for decades. Communities supported. Opportunities created. It wasn't greed that made the decision difficult. It was responsibility. Because Ali knew something few in that room truly grasped it. When you speak in front of millions, your words don't belong only to you anymore. They belong to everyone who believes in you. The king folded his hands. So, he voiced steady and expectant, do we have an agreement? Every eye in the palace turned toward Muhammad Ali, and the weight of the moment settled squarely on his shoulders. Silence settled over the palace like a storm waiting to break. Every advisor, every guard, every official in that golden hall watched Muhammad Ali with the same question in their eyes. Would he accept? The contract lay open on the polished table in front of him. The ink was ready. The cameras outside were ready. The world, though it didn't know it yet, was ready. $200 million. The king folded his hands calmly. He was not a man accustomed to rejection. His empire ran on obedience and agreements sealed with confidence. To him, this was not a gamble. It was an inevitability. Champion, the king said gently, this is an opportunity that benefits us both. Your legacy expands. Our people celebrate. History is made. Ali traced his fingers slowly along the edge of the table. History, he repeated quietly. The word carried weight. He had made history before in the ring, under the brightest lights. He had shocked the world against Sonny Liston. He had reclaimed glory in Zaire. He had stood as more than a boxer, a voice that challenged power when it mattered most. But history was not always kind to compromise. One of Ali's advisors leaned forward nervously. Champ, think about what this could do. Schools, hospitals, youth programs. With that kind of funding, you could help millions. It was a powerful argument, and it wasn't wrong. Money, when used well, could change lives. The king noticed the hesitation and pressed slightly harder. We are not asking you to betray yourself, he said, only to honor a partnership publicly. A few sentences, words of respect. A royal aide stepped forward with a sheet of paper. Typed neatly across it was the speech Ali would be expected to read. He scanned it quickly. Phrases about visionary leadership, about stability and strength, about unity under wise rule. Each line carefully crafted, each sentence polished to perfection. But none of it was his voice. Ali looked up. Does your country allow criticism of its leaders? He asked. The room shifted. A faint murmur moved among the advisors. The king's smile thinned, just slightly. Every nation has its structure, he replied diplomatically. Order is necessary for progress. That wasn't my question, Ali said evenly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The guards near the walls remained motionless, but their presence felt heavier now. Ali leaned back in his chair. When I speak, he continued, people listen. Not because I'm perfect, not because I'm rich, but because they believe I speak what I believe. No one interrupted him. I've lost titles for what I believed, lost years of my career, lost millions already. But I kept my voice. The king studied him carefully. You would not be losing your voice, he countered. You would simply be choosing your words carefully. Ali smiled faintly. There's a difference. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, or perhaps it was just the distant roar of journalists pressing against palace gates. Inside, tension tightened. One of the younger advisors whispered urgently to the king, but the ruler raised a hand, silencing him. Let me speak plainly, the king said at last. This offer is generous beyond precedent. Many men would compete for such an honor. You are admired here. We wish to celebrate you, and I appreciate that, Ali replied sincerely. He stood slowly from his chair. The movement alone shifted the energy of the room. Ali had always commanded space, even without raising his voice. But admiration isn't ownership, he added. The words landed softly but firmly. The king's eyes narrowed just slightly. You would walk away from $200 million. Ali didn't answer immediately. Instead, he thought of young fighters watching him, of children in neighborhoods who quoted his words, of people who saw him as proof that conviction mattered. If he stood on that stage and read those lines, what message would that send? That principles were flexible, that influence was for sale, that silence could be purchased. His advisor spoke again, this time more urgently. Champ, no one would blame you. It's just business. Ali turned toward him. It's never just business, he said quietly. The king rose from his throne like chair now, meeting Ali eye to eye. You realize, the king said carefully, that declining this offer may close doors for you here. Opportunities, partnerships. Ali nodded. I've had doors closed before. Another heavy silence. The contract remained untouched. The prepared speech remained unread. The air felt thick enough to cut. The king gave him one final chance. $200 million, he repeated. For one night, one message. Ali took a slow breath. And in that breath was everything. The fights, the sacrifices, the controversies, the unwavering stance that had defined him beyond boxing. He looked around the palace one last time. At the gold, at the power, at the expectation. Then he opened his mouth to speak, and the sentence he was about to say would change the entire atmosphere of that room forever. The room felt suspended in time. No one moved. No one even dared to breathe too loudly. Across from the throne, Muhammad Ali stood tall, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady. He had been in hostile arenas before, arenas where crowds booed, critics mocked, and opponents promised to break him. But this was different. This wasn't about punches. This was about pressure. The king waited. $200 million sat on the table in the form of a contract. A simple signature would transform the moment into a historic alliance. Ali glanced once more at the typed speech. The words looked clean, polished, carefully engineered. But they didn't sound like him. He remembered something his father once told him when he was young. If you let someone else write your truth, it won't belong to you anymore. Ali lifted the paper gently and placed it back on the table. I respect your invitation, he began calmly. The translators repeated his words in the king's language. The king nodded, expecting the acceptance to follow. Instead, Ali continued. But I have always believed that when a man speaks publicly, he carries responsibility. The air shifted. The king's expression hardened slightly, though his posture remained composed. Ali walked a few slow steps across the polished marble floor, his shoes echoing softly through the chamber. I have fans in countries with kings, he said, and fans in countries without them. A few advisors exchanged uneasy looks. I have supporters who agree with me, he continued, and supporters who disagree with me. He paused. But what they all share is the belief that I speak my own mind. The king's fingers tightened on the armrest of his chair. You are free to speak your mind, the king replied carefully. We simply request respect. Ali turned to face him fully. He said gently, not scripted. The sentence struck like a clean jab. Not loud, not aggressive, but precise. One of the royal advisors stepped forward, attempting to smooth the tension. Perhaps the wording can be adjusted. He offered quickly. Champion, we can make revisions. We can allow you to personalize the speech. Ali shook his head. That's not the issue. He stepped closer to the table, resting his hands lightly on its edge. If I stand in that arena and praise leadership I do not understand fully, I become part of something bigger than sport. The king's voice grew firmer now. You are already bigger than sport. Yes, Ali agreed, and that is exactly why I must be careful. Outside, the distant rumble of thunder grew louder, or perhaps it was the growing crowd beyond the palace gates. Inside, the golden walls felt tighter. The king rose from his seat and walked down the steps toward Ali. The two men now stood only a few feet apart, one holding political power over millions, the other holding moral influence over millions more. You speak of responsibility, the king said. Do you not have responsibility to your family, to your community? Think of what $200 million could accomplish. Ali's eyes softened slightly. I have thought about it. He imagined hospitals funded, scholarships created, neighborhoods rebuilt. The temptation was real, but so was the cost. If I sell my words today, he said slowly, how much will my silence cost tomorrow? The translators hesitated before repeating that line. The king studied him intensely. You would refuse this for pride? Ali smiled faintly. Not pride, for peace. Silence swallowed the hall again. Some advisors looked stunned. Others looked frustrated. No one in that palace was accustomed to hearing no, especially not from someone being offered unimaginable wealth. The king took a long breath. You understand the magnitude of what you are rejecting? Ali nodded. And you are certain? Ali looked at the contract one final time. $200 million. A single event. A global celebration, all within reach. But he knew something deeper. Legacy wasn't built on what you gained. It was built on what you refused to trade away. He straightened his jacket, and in a voice calm enough to quiet the entire chamber, he prepared to deliver the sentence that would end the negotiation. The sentence that would echo beyond the palace walls. The sentence that would cost him $200 million, but preserve something far more valuable. And as every eye locked onto him, he spoke. The hall fell completely silent. Even the guards, trained to remain unflinching, paused in their tracks. Every eye in the room, the kings, the advisors, the aides, was fixed on Muhammad Ali. $200 million. One speech, one moment to either cement a historic alliance or turn it down. Ali straightened his shoulders, breathed slowly, and let his eyes scan the golden hall, the crystal chandeliers, the portraits of long, dead rulers lining the walls. He saw history in the making. Not just his own, but that of every person who had ever looked up to him. He remembered the years he had sacrificed for principle. Being stripped of the heavyweight title for refusing the Vietnam draft, enduring ridicule from a world that didn't yet understand him, losing millions while standing firm on his beliefs. He had walked away from fame, fortune, and comfort for what he believed was right. And now, again, he faced a test of conviction. The king leaned slightly forward, his voice calm but measured. "Champion, are you certain? Opportunities like this do not come twice. Think of the legacy you could build. Think of the millions you could help." Ali's eyes softened, but his expression remained unwavering. "I have thought about it," he replied. His voice was steady, deliberate, and clear. "I have considered the money, the spectacle, the attention." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink into the room. The advisors shifted nervously. Even the translators held their breath, knowing they would have to repeat what came next word for word. "But I have also considered my responsibility, to my voice, to my truth, to every person who believes in me," Ali continued. Every ear leaned in. And then, as though the entire room had collectively exhaled, Ali spoke the sentence that would reverberate through history. "I would rather lose money than lose my voice." The words struck like a perfectly thrown jab, clean, precise, undeniable. Absolute silence followed. The king's face, so composed just moments before, shifted to disbelief. His brows furrowed ever so slightly. No one had ever turned down an offer like this, and certainly not with such calm confidence. Ali didn't need to elaborate. He didn't need to justify himself. The statement carried the weight of every fight he had won and lost, every stance he had taken against injustice, and every principle he had ever refused to compromise. An aide whispered urgently to the king, trying to soften the moment. Perhaps we can renegotiate. There is surely a compromise." The king waved him off. The room seemed suspended in time. He looked directly at Ali, realizing in that moment that this man's influence was greater than any sum of money, greater than any palace or kingdom. Ali's power was not derived from wealth or titles. It was from integrity, from authenticity, from the courage to speak truth when it mattered most. Outside the palace gates, cameras flashed. News of the meeting would spread quickly. Inside, every word, every pause, every glance carried more weight than any coin. Ali looked around once more, his gaze meeting the eyes of the king and his advisors. "I respect your offer," he said calmly, "but money is fleeting. Respect truth, those endure." The king leaned back slowly, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. The advisors exchanged whispers. Some were frustrated, some were impressed, but none could deny the power of what they had witnessed. Ali extended his hand politely to the king. "Thank you for your time and your generosity. I honor the gesture, but my voice is not for sale." The king accepted the handshake, his expression unreadable. There was no anger, only a quiet acknowledgement, perhaps even admiration. The hall began to stir. Guards resumed their positions. Advisors returned to their seats. But the weight of Ali's sentence lingered in the air. $200 million had been on the table. And yet it was clear that the true currency in that room was not money, it was principle. As Ali turned to leave, the aides and translators followed silently. The king watched him walk away, understanding that he had just met a man whose influence could not be purchased, whose voice could not be silenced, whose legacy was unshakable. Outside, the crowd of journalists and onlookers erupted, sensing that something extraordinary had just happened. Ali's single sentence, simple, concise, and powerful, would be remembered for generations. And as he stepped through the palace doors into the sunlight, the message was clear to the world. Some things are worth more than money. Some principles are priceless. And some voices can never be bought. The palace doors closed softly behind Muhammad Ali, and for a moment, the grand hall felt emptier than ever. The chandeliers still sparkled, the gold trim glimmered, and the marble floors shone under the light. But the energy had shifted. Where moments ago there had been tension and expectation, there was now a quiet sense of awe. Ali walked slowly toward the main exit, each step deliberate, grounded, and unhurried. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The entire room had witnessed the truth. A man could stand firm, unshaken, even when confronted with unimaginable temptation. The king remained seated, leaning slightly forward. His expression had softened, a mixture of respect and disbelief. He gestured for the senior advisors to approach. "Do not take this lightly. he said quietly. What we have just witnessed, it is rare, exceptional. A man who could command the world yet refuses to be commanded by it. The aides nodded, some scribbling notes, others whispering quietly. The murmurs spread among the advisors and officials. They knew they had been in the presence of someone whose legacy would be remembered not for wealth, fame, or titles, but for courage, for principle, and for the unwavering strength to say no when it mattered most. Ali had done more than refuse money. He had set a standard. He had reminded everyone in that palace, and eventually the world, that true power isn't in currency, contracts, or ceremonies, it's in conviction. Outside, journalists crowded around the gates, phones and cameras ready. They had heard whispers of the meeting, of the staggering offer, and of the legendary boxer who had turned it down. The moment Ali emerged, the flashbulbs erupted, and reporters shouted questions over one another.
Mr. Ali.
What about the offer? $200 million, why refuse it? Do you regret walking away? Ali paused. He smiled faintly, a calm smile that carried more weight than any shouted words. He raised a hand to quiet the crowd. Money comes and goes, he said slowly, clearly, but respect and integrity last a lifetime. The cameras clicked relentlessly. Recorders captured every word. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. Ali's simple answer would soon make headlines worldwide. $200 million had been offered, and the world would now know that some things are more valuable than money. Even his team, who had been anxiously watching the entire exchange, felt the enormity of the moment. They understood that Ali's decision was not impulsive, it was deliberate, principled, and calculated with a clarity that only true greatness can bring. Inside the palace, the king summoned Ali's aides to discuss the situation. He didn't need to issue threats or express disappointment. Ali had done what few men dared. He had prioritized his principles above wealth, power, and prestige. That alone demanded respect. Meanwhile, Ali continued his walk out of the palace with quiet dignity. The sun caught his profile as he stepped into the courtyard. A soft breeze brushed past him, and for a fleeting moment, it was as if the world paused. The lesson he had delivered was simple yet profound. A voice cannot be bought. A principle cannot be sold. And some things, like integrity, honor, and courage, are priceless. Once he reached his car, Ali paused to look back at the palace one last time. He nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement and respect. It wasn't a victory over the king, nor a defeat of wealth. It was a victory for truth, for authenticity, and for anyone who might one day face a similar test. As he drove away, the journalists' voices trailed behind him. Their questions had slowed, replaced by murmurs of admiration. Social media, though not yet in its modern form, would be buzzing with the story in newspapers, television broadcasts, and radio. And in every retelling, Ali's single sentence, "I would rather lose money than lose my voice," would echo, reminding the world why he was more than a boxer. He was a symbol. That evening, back at his hotel, Ali reflected quietly with his closest advisors. No one spoke of the money he had turned down. Instead, they spoke of impact, of legacy, and of the power of standing firm in one's beliefs. They knew that history would remember this day not for a contract unsigned, not for the riches refused, but for the courage displayed. And as night fell over the city, Ali slept with the knowledge that he had acted in accordance with every principle he had ever fought for. The world would recognize his victory, not in wealth or applause, but in the respect and admiration of millions who would hear the story for generations to come. Because in the end, he hadn't just walked away from money. He had walked toward something far greater: truth. True champions are remembered not only for the fights they win, but for the choices they make outside the ring. Ali had made one of the most important choices of his life, and the world would never forget it. The sun had set over the city, casting long shadows across the palace grounds. Inside, the gold and marble still gleamed under the last of the day's light, but the energy had shifted from tension to quiet reflection. Muhammad Ali had left the palace hours earlier, but his presence lingered like a silent echo, a lesson that could not be ignored. The world often measures success in numbers, in titles, in influence, but Ali had reminded everyone that day that true success is measured differently. It is measured by choices, by integrity, by the courage to stand firm even when the stakes are enormous. $200 million, one sentence, one unwavering refusal, and in that refusal, a lesson far greater than any purse could ever convey. Ali's sentence, "I would rather lose money than lose my voice," was simple, but its power was immeasurable. It spoke to something deeper than fame, wealth, or worldly recognition. It spoke to truth, authenticity, and principle. It reminded the world that influence carries responsibility, and that a voice is a force stronger than any sum of money. Across the globe, reporters, journalists, and citizens recounted the story. Newspapers printed it in bold headlines. Television anchors narrated it with awe. People discussed it in coffee shops, offices, and homes. The lesson spread far beyond the palace walls. Standing by your beliefs, even in the face of unimaginable temptation, is the truest form of courage. Ali's decision also sparked reflection among the wealthy and powerful. Here was a man, admired by millions, who could have walked into riches beyond imagination, yet he chose principle over profit. The king, too, would never forget the encounter. He had offered gold, influence, and spectacle, but the man before him had taught a lesson he could not buy or command. That respect and integrity are earned, never sold. And this lesson is not only for the famous or the powerful. It is for everyone. Every choice we make, every decision we take, carries weight. Sometimes the temptation to take the easy path is great. Sometimes compromise seems harmless. But the true test of character is revealed when we are asked to choose between convenience and conscience, between wealth and principle, between fear and courage. Ali's story reminds us that integrity has a cost, and that cost is often invisible to the world. The sacrifice may not always be as dramatic as refusing millions, but it is no less significant. Every time we stand for what we believe in, every time we refuse to compromise our values, we are carrying the same torch that Ali held high that day. The palace doors may have closed, but the echoes of that moment resonate across generations. Ali's voice, unbought and uncompromised, became a symbol of courage for athletes, leaders, and ordinary people alike. The lesson is timeless. No sum of money, no offer, no pressure can outweigh the power of speaking your truth. As we reflect on this story, it is clear that Muhammad Ali's legacy is not just in the victories in the ring or the titles he won, but in the victories of principle. In choosing to stand firm, he became more than a champion. He became an example, a guide, a voice for anyone who believes that integrity is worth more than gold. So let this story be a reminder: true power is silent. True respect is earned. True influence cannot be bought. If you believe in the strength of principle over wealth, type PRINCIPLS in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that standing firm is the greatest victory of all. And tell me, where are you watching from? I read every comment, and every story of courage inspires me just as much as Ali's did that day. Because in the end, Muhammad Ali didn't just say no to $200 million. He said yes to something far greater: the unshakable power of truth. And that is the legacy of a true champion.